Hi guys, tonight's story. How medieval peasants survived plagues, famine, and lords. Welcome to the Middle Ages. The year is, well, somewhere between 1100 and 1350. Not that it matters much. You don't have a calendar, or a clock, or shoes, with actual solace, but congratulations, you're alive. And that's already impressive. You are a peasant. That means you're one of the 90% of people who don't own anything, don't rule anything, and definitely don't bathe regularly. Your life is tied to the land literally. You were probably born in the same village where your great-grandparents were born. And if you're lucky, you'll die there too. Not too soon, we hope. Let's take a sleepy little walk through your average medieval day. Don't worry. We won't make you do any actual farming. Just some light imagining. Your home, one room, many creature sire houses cozy, in the way that a wooden box full of hay and smoke can be cozy. It has exactly one room. You share it with your spouse, children, chickens, and dough. Look, there's the family goat in the corner. The goat is not a guest. She lives here permanently. Your walls are made of wattle and daub, which is a fancy way of saying sticks and mud. Your floor is just dirt. If it rains, the dirt becomes mud. And when it's dry, it's dust. You've accepted that your toes will never be fully clean again. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof for the smoke to escape. Sometimes the smoke decides not to escape, and your home smells like a campfire that's been asleep for 100 years. The smell of peasant food. Let's talk about smells, very gently. You smell like old wool, damp earth, onions, and effort. Everyone around you smells the same, so it's fine. You've gone nose blind to your entire lifestyle. Bathing is a rare event. You wash your hands when you can. Splash water on your face. Maybe wipe your armpits with a rag soaked in vinegar, if it's a special occasion like a wedding or Tuesday. A proper bath, maybe once a season. If the weather's warm and the river isn't full of leeches. Your clothes, earth tones, and you wear layers made of wool. Always wool, dyed in the luxurious colors of beige, grey, or if you're feeling wild brown. Your shirt, or tunic, reaches your knees. You probably made it yourself, or your mother did. Your belt is a rope. Your shoes are more like leather, flaps pretending to be shoes. If you're a woman, you also wear a coif or kerchief on your head, partly for modesty, partly to keep the lice from escaping. Everything itches, but at least you're warm, mostly, waking up with the chicken steers, no alarm clock. You wake up when the rooster screams in your window, or when your baby starts crying, or when the sun hits your eyelids through the hole in the wall. It's early, always early. You have to start working before the best part of the day is over, which is, admittedly, a pretty short list of hours. There's no breakfast cereal. You grab a hunk of yesterday's barley bread, chew it thoughtfully, and wash it down with a warm sip of watered-down ale. Yes, ale for breakfast. No, you're not drunk. It's just safer than the water. Mostly. Your village, not much, but it's yours sort of. You live in a tiny village with maybe 30 to 50 other people. You all know each other's business. You also know who's been stealing turnips, who skipped church, and whose goat wandered into the Lord's garden last week. There's a church at the center, maybe a blacksmith, and a few other smoky huts like yours. Everything else is fields, endless fields, and mud. Always more mud. There's a communal oven, too. You don't have one at home, so once a week, you take your dough over, pay a small fee, and wait your turn to bake your bread. You chat, you gossip, you complain about the weather. It's like a medieval coffee shop, but with less coffee and more soot. Work, then more work, then maybe a Napier job, whatever keeps your family fed. You farm, mostly. You tend to animals. You dig things. You haul stuff. Every day is a lot of bending over, lifting heavy sacks, and trying not to accidentally step on a chicken. If you're not in the fields, you're spinning wool, weaving cloth, chopping firewood, or helping build something for your Lord. Like a fence you don't even need. Children start helping early. By age 7, they're herding geese or pulling weeds. Childhood is less about play and more about getting strong knees. Danger. Oh, it's everywhere. You're not exactly safe. There's no police, no hospital, no band-aids. If you cut your hand on a rusty plough, you either heal or don't. If you catch a fever, you try herbs and prayers and hope for the best. If someone steals your pig, well, good luck proving it. Bandits roam the woods. Wild animals come too close. Even a rainy week can ruin your harvest and starve your family. Life is fragile, but also very slow. Joy still exists, we promise you. Laugh. Sometimes. People still get married, tell stories, dance on feast days, and sneak away for a kiss behind the barn. It's not all struggle and suffering. There's a quiet rhythm to it all, a sort of simple peace that comes from knowing your place in the world, even as that place is occasionally flooded. You have your little joys, a warm fire, a good harvest, a baby that doesn't cry all night, a neighbor who shares their cheese, a song sung badly but with heart. And yet, you endure for all its dirt and hardship. Peasant life moves forward. The seasons change, your children grow, and you do your best with what you have. You survive not because it's easy, but because you must, because there's no other option. And because humans, somehow, keep going. Your job is everything. And that job is dirt. So, you've woken up at the crack of dawn again. Your knees hurt, your hands are rough, and the roosters already judged your entire existence with a single squawk. Welcome back to your peasant life. Today, like most days, your job is simple: survive. And to survive, you have to farm. Because your main occupation is food, growing it, harvesting it, carrying it, sometimes even staring at it and hoping it grows faster. Dirt is not just your workplace, it's your entire business plan. And guess what? You're working the land not because you love the smell of compost in the morning, but because if you don't, no one eats, including you, including your very loud, very hungry children. No pressure. Your tools, the basics, and not much else. Let's start with what's in your hands. You don't have a tractor or gloves, or even a proper wheelbarrow. You have a wooden plough pulled by a very tired ox, and a few hand tools that were probably passed down by your grandfather, or stolen from a Viking raid. Who knows? There's the hoe for digging and chopping, a sickle for harvesting grain and accidentally nicking your finger, and of course, the spade for shoveling endless amounts of earth, compost, and questionable animal surprises. Every tool has a wooden handle that gives you splinters and a dull metal end that bends when it shouldn't, but you make it work. Because you must. The soil is your boss now. Soil is everything. Good soil means good crops. Bad soil means no dinner. And honestly, most medieval soil isn't that great. It's been used for generations. It's tired. Just like you. That's why peasants use crop rotation, even if they don't call it that. Basically, one year you plant grain, the next year beans or peas, then you let it rest, covered in weeds and goats. That's your fallow year. Not because you're lazy, but because even dirt needs a break sometimes. You also use manure to fertilize the fields, which is a polite word for you're literally farming with poop. But again, it works. Kind of. What you grow The peasant food pyramid, your number one crop is grain. Not fancy stuff, just barley, rye, or oats. Wheat is for rich people and monks. You grind the grain into flour and turn it into flat, dense bread that can double as a roof tile in emergencies. You also grow vegetables, onions, leeks, turnips, and cabbage. Lots of cabbage, possibly too much cabbage. There are days you dream of a single carrot. There's no corn, no potatoes, no tomatoes. They haven't been discovered yet. You're centuries too early for French fries. Sorry, you might also grow legumes, beans and peas too. Give your soil and your body some protein. It's not glamorous, but it keeps you going. Rain is both friend and enemy. Success of your entire year depends on the weather, which is a problem, because the weather doesn't care about your feelings. If it rains too much, your crops drown. If it rains too little, they shrivel up. If there's a late frost, it kills the seedlings. If there's a freak hailstorm in June, you just sit on your porch and cry softly into your cabbage soup. You don't have irrigation systems, just faith, clouds, and a constant feeling of dread. Harvest season. All hands on deck when harvest time arrives. It's an all-out scramble. You, your family, and even your grumpy uncle with the bad back all head to the fields. Every stalk of grain must be cut, gathered, and bundled before the rain ruins it. It's hot. It's scratchy. Your hands bleed. Your knees ache. You fall asleep with straw in your hair and bugs in your shoes. But harvest is the moment you've worked all year for. A good one means you'll survive the winter. A bad one means, well, you start eyeing your neighbor's chicken with suspicious interest, animals, your co-workers and emergency food supply. You also tend animals. Not many, maybe a pig, a few chickens, and a cow if you're lucky. They give you milk, eggs, and manure, and eventually meat, though probably not until they've lived a long and productive life. Cows pull plows. Pigs eat your scraps, chickens run in circles, and goats eat everything, including your laundry, the roof thatch, and your sense of peace. Feeding and watering animals is a chore that never ends. Even in the snow, even during storms, even when you'd rather lie in the dirt and nap forever. Lords want their share of your work. Even though you grew the food, your Lord wants a slice. Sometimes literally, you owe him part of your harvest, usually grain, eggs, and other goods. It's called feudal rent, and it's due whether you had a good year or not. And you owe the church a tenth of everything, too. That's the tithe, because God, apparently, also eats porridge. After you've paid your dues, what's left is for your family, and if you're lucky, there's just enough to fill your wooden pantry with sacks of grain and dried onions. If you're not lucky, well, soup again. With fewer onions, you're always tired. Always. Farming is not a part-time job. It's all day, every day. Even your so-called rest days involve mending tools, fixing fences, or catching that one goose that refuses to stay in the pen. You fall asleep sitting up. You dream about plows. Your calluses have calluses. But somehow, you keep going. Because while the land can be cruel, it's also your only hope. You don't work for wealth or glory. You work because dirt, as miserable as it is, feeds you. And there's something quietly heroic in that. A simple satisfaction. The endless labor. There's a kind of rhythm to it all. You plant, you pray, you harvest, you eat. And even if the bread is hard and the cabbage is repetitive, you made it. With your own hands, there's peace in that. In knowing you pulled something from the earth and turned it into life. Lords, rents, and why you're always in debt. So, you've ploughed your fields. You've hauled hay, herded goats, and harvested enough barley to feed your family for the winter. You're exhausted, sore, and covered in at least 3 types of dirt, and just when you think you can relax, here comes your Lord, not to help. No, he's here to take a share of everything you've worked for, pat you on the head maybe, and ride off dramatically on his well-fed horse while you hold a basket of unpaid rent. Welcome to feudalism. What is a lord, and why do you owe him everything? Your lord is the local nobleman who technically owns the land you live on. That includes your field, your house, the woods behind your house, the road, the pigs that wander into the road, and possibly even the air you breathe, though he hasn't taxed that yet. Give it time. You don't own your land, you hold it in service, which means you work the land in exchange for protection. You know, from bandits, wild animals, or other lords who want to be your new boss. In theory, it's a trade. You farm, he defends. In reality, you farm, and he mostly just sends people to collect your grain. Meet the manor system. Medieval corporate life. Your village is part of a manor, which is kind of like a medieval franchise. Your lord is the CEO. You are not. You're more like an overworked intern with no benefits. The manor includes the domain, land the lord keeps for himself, tenant lands, fields you and other peasants work for your own use, common land, technically shared, but mostly used by your neighbor's obnoxious sheep. You owe the lord rent. Not in cash, you barely have any, but in grain, eggs, firewood, wool, and sometimes chickens. Lots of chickens. And labor, too. You owe the lord several days a week of free work on his fields, even if your own crops are dying. Because priorities, rents, dues, and other reasons, your broke-fiddle obligations are basically a long scroll of things you owe. Here's a sample list. Week work, days you work on the Lord's land, boom work, extra work during harvests or emergencies which are constant, Harriet, a death tax. Yes, your family owes the Lord your best ox when you die, because why not? Tallage, random taxes whenever the Lord is low on coin, which is suspiciously often. Merchant, a fee if your daughter gets married, because love costs money. Sometimes the Lord even charges you to use his mill to grind your grain. And if you sneak off to grind it on a flat stone behind your house, well, that's illegal. There's a fine for that, too. Justice, feudal style. Your lord also controls the local manorial court. So if there's a dispute, say, your neighbor's goat ate your cabbages again, you take it to court, which is held in a shed, presided over by the lord, or his bailiff, who is probably his cousin, who also owns the goat. In short, justice is flexible. You can be fined for not attending court, for not repairing your fence, or for gathering too much firewood. You can even be fined for baking bad bread. Yes, that's a thing. Why don't you leave? The question of every tired peasant. Well, you're not exactly free. If you're a serf, you're legally tied to the land. You can't leave without permission. If you try, the local officials might drag you back, or your neighbors might tell on you, because they're also stuck. Even if you're a freeman, a peasant with a bit more autonomy, you still need land to live. And guess who owns all the land? That's right, the lords. It's a landlord's world, and you're just renting in it. Besides, where would you even go? The next village. They already have their own lord, their own taxes, and someone to fill the local cabbage growing role. The lord's life, slightly different than yours. Your lord lives in a manor house, which might have 2 entire floors. Imagine the luxury. He eats neat every day, drinks real wine, owns actual furniture, and sometimes, just for fun, he holds a feast. You get invited if he's feeling generous. Or if he wants everyone to see his new goblet. While you're working the fields, he's riding horses, hunting deer, and arguing with other lords about whose moat is bigger. But to be fair, he also has responsibilities. He has to deal with royal taxes, keep up appearances at court, and occasionally go off to war wearing 80 pounds of chainmail. Which, honestly, sounds exhausting to Dot when things go bad, which they often do. Sometimes your lord dies and his son takes over. And guess what? The new lord might change all the rules. Raise the rents, demand more labor, build a wall through your field. Just because he can. If there's war or rebellion, you're expected to help, not with strategy, of course, but with digging ditches, carrying supplies, and standing around while knights yell things. And if the crops fail or a disease rolls through the manor, tough luck, the lord still wants his rent. The debts don't stop just because you're coughing blood and eating boiled grass. Why this all just kept going. It sounds unfair, and it was. But it worked for centuries, because it was normal. Your father did it. His father did it. You do it because everyone does it, and because stepping out of line means trouble. There were no protest signs, no peasant unions, just hard work, quiet complaints, and the occasional dream that your next life would involve fewer chickens and more cushions, a quiet kind of resistance still. Not everything was total submission. Sometimes peasants negotiated better rents, or fled during chaos, or banded together to petition for better terms. Occasionally, someone would even write a very polite complaint letter, which they had to pay someone else to write, because most peasants couldn't read or write. But the effort was there. And slowly, very slowly, things did begin to change. But not yet, for now, you've still got barley to thresh and a lord to appease. Eat this, not that. The peasant diet. It's time to talk about food, not fancy food, not feast food, not even treat yourself food. We're talking peasant food, basic, filling, repetitive, and, let's say, humble, because if you're living in medieval times, your diet isn't about flavor. It's about survival. You don't eat for fun. You eat to keep from falling over while digging holes in the cold. And if your meal happens to taste okay, that's just a bonus. So let's take a sleepy stroll through a peasant's pantry. Don't worry, we won't run out of anything except variety. Let's start with bread, because you always do. Bread is the foundation of your entire diet, morning, noon, and night. It's made from coarse ground barley, rye, or oats. Wheat is a luxury reserved for rich folks, monks, and the occasional village feast day. Your bread is thick, dense, and often as heavy as your shovel. Some days it's crusty, some days it's slightly moldy. You just cut that part off. It's fine. You bake once a week, usually in the village's communal oven. Everyone lines up, trading gossip while loaves rise. If you're lucky, you don't burn yours this time. You may not have much, but by medieval standards, having bread is having everything. Ale for breakfast, because why not? It's morning. You reach for a drink. Is it tea? No. Juice? Definitely not. Water? Only if you enjoy rolling the dice with dysentery. Your drink of choice is ale. A mild, cloudy, low alcohol brew made from grains and boiled water. You brew it yourself, or get it from a neighbor who brews a little better than you do. Even kids drink it. It's safer than water, has calories, and gives you just enough courage to face another day of cabbage. Cabbage, always cabbage. Now let's get to the vegetables. And by vegetables, we mostly mean cabbage. It's cheap. It grows almost anywhere, and it stores well, so you eat it. A lot. There's also onions, leeks, turnips, and beans. If you've got a garden, and you do, because your life depends on it, you grow whatever you can. Carrots, if you're lucky. Peas, when it's the season. And maybe some garlic, if your neighbor is generous or distracted. It's not colorful, but it's nutritious enough to keep you upright. The peasant stew, also known as diner. You don't make meals, you make stew. A pot of whatever you've got, simmered together over a smoky fire until it's edible. Maybe there's barley in it, maybe cabbage, maybe a suspicious looking root you're 75% sure is food. If you're lucky, there's a scrap of salted meat floating on top like a sad little boat. It's called pottage, and it's your go-to dish. Add water, boil 4 hours, and serve again and again and again, and tomorrow you just add more water and eat it again. The flavor changes slightly with each reheating. That's variety. Medieval-style. Meat. Rare, special, slightly suspicious. Let's be clear, meat is not a regular thing. Chickens lay eggs, pigs provide manure, cows give milk. Killing one is a big deal, usually reserved for holidays or when an animal is too old to do its job. When you do eat meat, it's probably salted, smoked, or dried. Fresh meat doesn't keep well unless it's cold out or you eat very, very fast. Occasionally, you might catch a rabbit or squirrel. But be careful, hunting the Lord's game is illegal, and poaching can land you in the stocks, or worse. So if someone asks where you got that mysterious leg of venison, just shrug and say, found it. Dairy, butter, cheese, and moo. If you have a cow, goat, or access to someone else's, you get milk. But milk spoils fast, so you turn it into butter or cheese as quickly as you can. The cheese is rough and crumbly. The butter is more like a lumpy spread, but both taste heavenly on that third day barley bread, unless your goat stepped in it first, which happens. Eggs. Nature's portable meal. Chickens lay eggs. Eggs feed you. Simple, you eat them boiled, fried, or baked into flat, weird medieval pancakes. But not too many. Some are saved for market, or owed to the Lord as rent, and don't even think about keeping the eggs that belong to the communal hen. That's a whole village argument waiting to happen. Fruits and foraging. If it grows wild, you'll try to eat it. That includes apples, the sour kind, blackberries, the thorny kind, hazelnuts, nettles. Yes, you can cook them. Mushrooms, but only if you know what you're doing. You gather whatever you can in the woods. Berries in the summer, nuts in the fall, and weird greens in the spring that your grandma swears cured her cough once. Fasting. But also not really. Religion plays a big role in your meals. There are days, lots of them, when the church says you can't eat meat. That includes Fridays, Lent, Advent, and about half the year. Really. So you make do with fish. Dried fish, salted fish, eel, if you're coastal or brave. If you live far from a river, fish becomes a generous category. There were times when beavers and puffins were declared fish by local bishops. Don't ask why, just chew quietly. Dessert. If you want something sweet, good luck. Sugar is expensive, rare, and basically a fantasy. But you do get honey if someone in the village keeps bees, fruit in season, maybe a baked treat made with dried apples, and a lot of hope. You don't crave sugar the way modern folks do. You just want something that doesn't taste like onion. Table manners. Minimal. You eat from a wooden bowl with a wooden spoon, or a chunk of bread, or your fingers. No forks, no napkins, no tablecloths unless you count your apron. You sit on a bench or a stump, or the ground. You eat with your family. You share everything. And you don't waste food, ever. Even the crusts get used. Even the bones get boiled. Even the burnt bits are scraped into tomorrow's stew. So what's it like, really? It's not glamorous. It's not even particularly tasty. But it fills your belly, keeps your legs moving, and gives you just enough energy to survive another day of hard labor. Grumpy livestock and mysterious smells. You don't complain too much. You can't afford to. And deep down, you're grateful for every meal that gets you through one more cold morning and one more long evening. Disease is in the air, water, and everything. Let's be honest, the medieval world isn't exactly known for its hygiene. Sure, it is charm, rolling green fields, thatched cottages, roosters that yell too early, but it also has something else. Disease, lots of it. In the air, in the water, in the hay, in your hair. Disease is basically your invisible roommate. If you're a peasant in medieval Europe, getting sick is less of an if and more of a how often, and most of the time, the cure involves herbs, hope, and prayers mumbled in Latin. So grab your slightly damp blanket, take a seat by the smoky hearth, and let's quietly review the many ways your health is constantly under attack. Water. Suspicious at best you're thirsty. Do you drink water? Ha, that's cute. The well in your village is a communal one. It's deep, dark, and sometimes smells weird. There's no filtration system, no purification tablets. Just hope. Sometimes you drink straight from a nearby stream, which also happens to be the same place your neighbor washes their laundry, your goats bathe, and someone once dumped a bucket of something suspicious, which is why many peasants prefer ale. Even the weak kind is safer than raw water, because at least it's been boiled, mostly. Bathing. A special occasion maybe. It's talk about cleanliness, or the medieval version of it. You don't have a bathtub, or a shower, or running water. You have a bucket, a rag, and a strong tolerance for grime. Full baths are rare. When they happen, they're often shared with your siblings, your kids, and maybe the neighbor's baby if space is tight. The water heats over the fire. You go in cleanest to dirtiest, so if you're last, good luck. But honestly, most people just rinse when they can. Maybe a splash at the river, maybe a quick scrub with vinegar and a prayer. And deodorant, never. Heard of a. Personal hygiene. Good intentions. Bad results. You do what you can. You brush your teeth with a frayed stick. You clean your hands before meals, maybe. You comb your hair with a wooden comb that pulls more lice than tangles. You wash your clothes a few times a year, or when they can walk away on their own. Still, it's hard to stay clean when you share a hut with animals, work in mud all day, and sleep next to a pile of damp straw. Germs aren't even a known concept yet, but if they were, they'd be your closest neighbors. Lice, fleas, and other itchy companionship while never really alone. Even when you're resting peacefully, you've got company, your mattress, stuffed with straw, also home to fleas, your hair, home to lice, your dog, covered in both, your goat, also possibly sharing their fleas with your entire family. You scratch a lot. Everyone does, it's just part of the lifestyle. There are some homemade remedies like lavender, ashes, or garlic, but nothing really works forever. You don't complain, though. You just learn to ignore the itch and keep walking. Colds, fevers, and coughs that don't quit. Common cold isn't common here, it's a full-blown event. You wake up coughing. You keep coughing. You cough in the fields, at meals, in your sleep. You drink warm broth and herbal tea, and maybe chew on raw root your grandmother insists is magic. You have no thermometer, No medicine, no understanding of bacteria, just a hope that you'll feel better by next Sunday. Sometimes you do. Other times, well, let's not think too hard about that. Broken bones. Good luck with that. Accidents happen. You fall off a ladder. A cart runs over your foot. A cow kicks you in the ribs. You don't go to the hospital. There isn't one. You go to Agnes, the village herbalist, who wraps your leg in cloth and mutters a prayer over it. If you're lucky, it heals crooked but functional. If you're not, well, you just limp forever now. That's your new personality trait. There are no casts, no anesthesia, and definitely no dental care, so if you get a toothache, just good luck. Home remedies and hopeful which craftier village healer has many ideas, some helpful, some less so. Headache. Wrap a ribbon soaked in vinegar around your forehead. Fever. Rub goose grease on your chest. Cough. Boil turnips with honey and whisper at the moon. Plague. Bury a toad in the backyard and try not to make eye contact. Medicine is mostly herbs, poultices, and an enthusiastic faith in the mystical power of onions. Sometimes it works, sometimes the cure is worse than the disease, but honestly, your options are limited. So you nod, drink the weird tea, and hope for the best, the big ones. Sickness that stops everything. Then there are the real illnesses, the scary ones. Dysentery comes from bad water. You'll know it when it hits. Leprosy causes fear, isolation, and a very dramatic move to a leper house. Sweating sickness, sudden, deadly, mysterious. St. Anthony's fire, caused by mouldy grain, makes your limbs feel like they're burning. Casual, and, of course, plague, but that gets its own chapter. Coming soon. These aren't just stay in bed and get better illnesses. These are say your goodbyes and hope your cousin remembers to feed the pigs illnesses. You get sick, you rest, you keep going. There's no sick leave. No pharmacy, no tissues. If you're unwell, you stay home unless there's harvesting to do, or someone needs help birthing a calf. Rest is a luxury, so most peasants just work through it. A runny nose doesn't stop the plow. A fever doesn't stop the firewood from needing chopped. You lie down when you can. You get up when you must. And if you survive, that's a win. You're stronger than you look. Here's the strange part. Despite all this, despite the dirt, the germs, the random diseases named after saints and symptoms, you keep going. Maybe it's because you eat simply. Maybe it's because you're outdoors all the time. Maybe it's because you've built up an immune system that could fight a bear. Or maybe it's just sheer peasant stubbornness. Either way, you survive longer than you probably should. So tonight, as you cough quietly under your straw blanket and scratch at the flea bites behind your ear, take comfort in one thing. Black Death comes to town. Imagine it's the year 1348. You're in your village, minding your business, feeding the chickens, sneezing into your sleeve, maybe complaining about the price of salt when rumors start drifting in. Whispers from the market, strange news from the next town over. A merchant says people are dying quickly. Another says entire villages are just gone. Some say it started far away, in the east. Others say it came on ships. You don't know who to believe. But one thing's clear. Something terrible is coming. A death with many names. Modern world calls it the Black Death. But you wouldn't have called it that. Not yet. You might have called it the Great Mortality, the Pestilence, or just God's punishment. Because of course you did. No one knows it's a bacterium called Yersinia pestis. No one knows it travels on fleas, riding rats like tiny furry taxis. No one knows how to stop it. But soon enough, Everyone knows what it does. It starts with a cough. Then it gets worse. Eat first. It seems like the usual illness. Fever, headache, chills. Nothing a good onion poultice can't fix, right? But then the buboes show up, those large, swollen lumps under your arms and near your groin. Painful, hot, turning black. Then there's vomiting, sometimes blood. Then, within days, sometimes hours, people simply collapse. It's fast. It's cruel. And it doesn't care if you're a peasant, priest, or pig thief. You watch your village change. Eat first. People try to carry on. You go to the fields, the church bell rings. Someone makes barley soup. But then more people start coughing. Someone falls in the road. The healers stop showing up. Your neighbor boards up his door and doesn't come out again. Soon. It's quiet. Too quiet. Even the goats are confused. What do? You don't have a plan. You're not a doctor. You barely know what a germ is. But here's what some people try. Fleeing to the forest doesn't help. Burning herbs in the home to purify the air smells nice, at least. Hanging garlic in doorways helps with vampires, not so much with plague. Whipping themselves in the streets to show God how sorry they are. Ouch. And some just pray. A lot. The grave diggers can't keep up usually. Death is handled with care. A funeral, a priest, a burial. Not now. There are too many bodies. The churchyard is full. Entire families die before they can even be buried. Mass graves appear. Shallow pits. Quick prayers. A handful of dirt. It's not that people don't care. They just can't keep up. Even death, once solemn and sacred, becomes another chore to rush through before nightfall. You hope. You wait. You hide. Some people shut themselves indoors. They cover windows with cloth. They mark their doors with crosses. You leave food outside for others, avoiding face-to-face contact. You stop going to church not because you're a sinner, but because half the congregation is coughing. You avoid anyone with a sniffle, or a twitch, or anything, really. Even hugs become dangerous. It hits the cities hardest. But you're not safe. I hear stories of cities where the dead line the streets, people dying in taverns, in churches, even in the arms of their families. You might live in the countryside, but the plague doesn't care. It follows trade routes. It rides wagons. It finds your little village, too. There's nowhere to run. Not really. Somehow. Even the sheep are nervous. Society wobbles a lot when half your neighbors are gone. And the baker hasn't opened in days. And there's no priest left to hold mass. It changes things. The system starts to break. Fields go unharvested. Prices skyrocket. Some lords panic and flee. Others die, leaving villages without leadership. It's not just a health crisis. It's an everything crisis. Even the tax collector stops coming. Small victories. Weird times bring weird beliefs. People try to explain what's happening. Theories include an angry god, classic, bad air, Saturn and Jupiter getting too close, cosmic drama, cats, so people kill cats, which just makes the rats worse. There's fear. There's superstition. And there's blaming. Lots of blaming. It's not pretty. But when the world feels like it's ending, people do strange things to feel like they have some control. You get lucky somehow. You survive. You don't know why. Maybe you were already sick last month with something else. Maybe the flea skipped you. Maybe the Suns really were watching, but you're still standing. And when the dust settles, when the last cough fades, and the smell of burning herbs finally clears, you step outside. And the world feels emptier. The silence after there are fewer people, fewer sounds, fewer chickens. You walk past huts that are locked tight, past fields left untended, Past homes where smoke no longer rises from chimneys, but you're alive. You breathe the cool morning air and stretch your sore limbs. You look at the sky and wonder what's next. And then you go milk the cow, because life, somehow, goes on. The world is different now. Black Death changed everything. Not just the number of people, but how peasants live, how they work, what they expect. Labor is suddenly rare. That gives survivors leverage. Wages rise. Some serfs leave their lords for better land. The old system cracks, just a little. You may not understand the politics, but you feel it. Something has shifted. Maybe the world won't go back to the way it was. Maybe, just maybe, it will go somewhere new. So sleep well, peasant. You've just survived one of the worst pandemics in human history. You're tired. You're confused. You still have a weird cough, but you made it. Death, religion, and the afterlife you're hoping for. You've survived the Black Death somehow. Your hair is a little grayer, your village is a little quieter, and your soul is wondering what's next. Because if there's one thing medieval life gives you time to think about between digging turnips and avoiding fevers, it's death. Not in a spooky way, just in a regular, everyday, oh, there goes Uncle Bern again sort of way. And with death always just around the dung heap, people naturally turn to religion. It's not a hobby. It's not a Sunday thing. It's the lens through which everything is seen, including, you guessed it, the afterlife. So tonight, we're going to gently float through what it meant to live, die, and maybe rise again. Medieval peasant style, church bells and the rhythm of time. First sound you usually hear other than roosters screaming is the church bell. It rings out across the fields and through the village, marking time, calling you to mass, or sometimes tolling ominously for someone who didn't make it through the night. Even if you can't read, and you definitely can't afford a Bible, you know your church calendar better than your own birthday, which you also don't know. By the way, feast days, Saints' days, Candlemas, Michaelmas, masses for the dead. It's a never-ending cycle of holy reminders, a spiritual metronome, clicking away in the background of your very earthy life. Your church, stone, smoke, and echo. The village church is likely the one real stone building you've ever been inside. It's cold. It smells like beeswax, wet wool, and the breath of 100 villagers in one small space inside. Flickering candles, the drone of Latin hymns, a carved crucifix, and maybe a dusty statue of the Virgin Mary with one hand chipped off. There's no pew to sit in. You stand, you kneel, you try not to fall asleep. No judgment if you do. You don't understand the Latin, but you feel it. The hum of something bigger than your little wooden hut and your two goats. Something eternal. Heaven, hell, and the stuff in between. Your entire life is structured around getting to heaven, which you imagine as a golden place above the clouds, where pain doesn't exist and everyone has bread, and no one steals your pig. But getting there isn't easy. There are rules, so many rules, and sin is everywhere. Hell, on the other hand, is very well advertised. You've seen the fresco on the church wall. Demons with pitchforks, people in boiling cauldrons, fire, screaming, regret. It's like your worst fever dream, but forever. And then there's purgatory, a kind of soul waiting room, full of fire and paperwork, where you burn off your leftover sins before heading upstairs. You'll probably spend some time there. Everyone does, unless you're a saint. Which, let's be honest, you are not. Confession, your medieval reset button. Feeling guilty. Did you curse under your breath when the cow stepped on your foot? Or steal your neighbor's onions? Just one. You were hungry. Closing parenthesis. Well, That's what confession is for. You kneel, you mumble. The priest listens, occasionally sighs, and gives you a penance. Maybe some prayers, maybe a charitable act, maybe building a fence for the monastery pigs. And just like that, your soul is a little cleaner. For now, the church owns kind of everything. You know how your Lord owns your land. Well, the church owns a lot of land too. Sometimes even more than the Lord's. The church collects tithes, a tenth of everything you grow or earn. You might not love giving up part of your barley, but you do it. It's not optional. Besides, you want those prayers said for your soul. The church also owns your trust. Priests keep records, perform weddings, bless the fields, scare your kids into behaving. They're spiritual leaders and village admin all rolled into one. They may not always be perfect. Some drink a little too much wine. Some snooze during Mass. But they're all you've got. Death comes calling again when someone dies, say. The guy who kept borrowing your spade without asking, it's a big deal. You can't just bury people and move on. There's a whole process. A priest must bless the body. Prayers are said. Candles are lit. Everyone gathers, dressed in their one dark cloak. The body's buried in holy ground, preferably near a church. If you're really lucky or rich, people keep praying for your soul after you die. This is important, because remember, you might be stuck in purgatory for a very long time. Ghosts. Oh, yes, ghosts. You absolutely believe in ghosts. Everyone does. Not the spooky sheet kind. But the souls of the restless dead, people who weren't buried right, or who still have sins hanging over their heads, they might show up in dreams, or flicker at the edge of the forest, or moan quietly during storms. What do you do about it? Light candles, pray harder, maybe donate some barley to the church, just in case. Miracles, relics, and hope. Despite all the gloom, religion is also your greatest hope. You believe in miracles, saints who heal, holy wells, sacred bones that glow under the right moon. You might travel miles to see a relic, a sliver of wood from the true cross, or a saint's thumb bone sealed in glass. And maybe, just maybe, if you pray the right words and fast for 3 days, your sick child will recover, or the storm will pass, or your cow will start giving milk again. Miracles are rare, but they're not impossible. You're not alone in the afterlife. Each night, when you stare up at the rafters of your hut and the fire is dying low, you think of your loved ones, the ones you buried, the ones lost to famine, or plague, or war. You don't think of them as gone. You imagine them walking through fields of golden light, free of pain, waiting for you. And maybe that thought more than anything gets you through the hardest seasons. Weather, famine, and the sky just hates you. You ever get the feeling the weather is out to get you? Like the rain knows exactly when to ruin your haystack. Or the sun waits until you're halfway through plowing the field to start melting your eyebrows off. Well, medieval peasants knew that feeling very well. The difference is, you don't depend on a single field of barley to keep your family alive through winter. They did, and the sky, well, the sky didn't care. So tonight, we lie back on our itchy straw mattress, listen to the distant roll of thunder, and gently contemplate how the weather tried to ruin everything. Nature, the real villain of the Middle Age. Lords were bad, plague was worse, but weather was relentless. Too much rain, and your crops drowned. Too little rain, and they shriveled. A late frost could turn your hopes into compost overnight. There were no forecasts, no radar, no umbrellas, just a farmer staring up at the sky, wondering if that cloud meant a gentle shower, or 6 months of hunger. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, or, all rain it's talk about one of the worst times to be a peasant. Between 1315 and 1317, Europe was hit with the kind of weather that made people start asking serious questions about whether God was mad. Rain. Endless, chilly, soggy, crop drowning rain. It started in spring and kept going through summer. Crops failed. Hay rotted in the fields. Livestock starved because there was nothing to feed them. And then people starved because there was no livestock. This wasn't just a bad season. It was years of no food. Whole villages emptied out. People dug up old grain from storage pits. Some even, brace yourself, ate tree bark. Others chewed leather. And some, let's just say, things got dark. If you survived that, you probably looked at every cloud for the rest of your life like it owed you money. Starving, slowly and quietly. Famine wasn't always dramatic. Most years, it didn't involve screaming or chaos, just slow, grinding malnutrition. Here's how it usually went. The harvest is poor. You stretch your grain supply, mixing it with weeds or acorns. By February, you're out of food. By March, you're boiling anything vaguely edible. By April, the children are quiet. And by May, you're praying for an early summer and promising to never grumble about onions again. Hunger shrinks your world. You stop thinking about next year. You stop caring about the Lord's taxes. You stop noticing how much your back hurts. You just think about food. And in a village of 40 people, every empty stomach echoes. Winter. The annual boar spat leaven in good years. Winter was a test. You had to store enough grain, salt enough meat, patch every hole in the thatch, and somehow keep the firewood dry. Cold seeped in through every crack. The hearth fire might go out at night, and if it did, you'd wake up with your hair frozen to your forehead. Snow meant beauty for exactly 5 minutes, and then it meant wet socks, frozen wells, and frostbitten toes. And if your firewood ran out, well, that's why you were supposed to gather extra in autumn, but you didn't, because your child had the fever, and then your cousin borrowed your axe and never returned it. So now you're burning old furniture. Again. Drought. When the sky just gives up. On the flip side, drought was equally awful. Just drier. No rain meant dry wells, cracked earth, dusty wheat, angry cows. Your barley turned to straw. Your vegetables bolted early. Your skin burned from working in the sun. And there was no water to spare for cleaning, which meant you smelled worse than usual. Which is saying something. And the worst part, you still owed rent to your lord. Even if your field gave you 5 sad onions and a rock, he expected his share, because noble stomachs didn't care about peasant weather, coping with nothing, the medieval way. So, how did peasants handle it? They were resilient, stubborn, clever in quiet ways. Here are some strategies: stretching meals, watered down porridge, thin soups, bread made with beans or crushed acorns. Foraging, nettles, wild garlic, mushrooms carefully, berries, herbs, roots, anything green that wouldn't kill you. Barter and beg, trade a chicken for a sack of rye. Knock on the monastery's door and hope the friars feel generous. Community sharing, poor families helping even poorer families. 1 pot of stew stretched across 3 households. And of course, prayer, lots and lots of prayer. Is God mad or just forgetful? When your crops fail and the sky won't listen, you start asking questions. Is this a punishment? A test? A sign of the end times? The village priest might tell you to confess more, fast harder, donate to the church. Maybe God is angry because someone skipped mass or ate meat on a Friday. So you kneel, you light candles, you march in religious processions, you weep. And when that still doesn't work, you blame the neighbors, Maybe the new guy is cursed. Or maybe it's witches, or Jews, or invisible demons poisoning the air. Anything to explain why your turnips keep dying. Because when you don't understand climate science, you get creative. And yet, you survive not always, but often enough, you lose. Wait, you bury a friend. You go a little quiet for a while, but spring does return. It always does. A few peas sprout, a calf is born. A bit of meat simmers in the pot again. And just like that, laughter returns to the village. Not loud laughter, not joyful feasting, just the quiet chuckle of someone who finds a fat onion after 6 months of cabbage shoot. In the end, peasants survived not with big victories, but with little endurances, day after day, storm after storm, taxes, tithes, and totally unfair fees. So, you've survived the rain, the snow, the plague, and that week you ate boiled dandelions. You've pulled barley from frozen ground, helped birth a goat in the dark, and somehow kept your roof from caving in. And now it's time to pay up. Because nothing says thank you for surviving like a long list of random fees and grain demands from people who've never held a shovel in their lives. Welcome to the medieval tax system. It's deeply unfair, endlessly confusing, and lucky for us, wonderfully boring to fall asleep to. Let's begin. The Lord wants his share first up. Your feudal lord. He's the local noble who owns the land you live on. Technically, it's his field you farm, his woods you wander, his cow that wandered into your garden and ate your leeks. You, dear peasant, are a serf, not a slave, but not exactly free either. In exchange for working a little plot of land, you owe your lord a chunk of your harvest, usually the good stuff. Several days of free labor each week known as corvée, fixing his fences, digging his ditches, or helping build his new barn when he feels fancy. That's just on a good day. Let's talk tithes next up. The church. They don't farm. They don't fight. But they do collect the tithe, a mandatory donation of 1/10 of everything you produce, 10% of your barley. Fork it over, 10% of your eggs, yes, even the stinky ones. 10% of your wool, cabbages, pigs, and beeswax. All of it. This goes to the local parish priest, who promises to use it wisely, which might mean helping the poor, or buying a new gold chalice, depending on how holy he's feeling that week. And if you think about skipping it, God is watching. And so is the priest, and so is the priest's assistant, who's very good at math, rent, fees, fines, and... Wait, what's a Harriet? Let's review the other fun things you might owe. Rent. Even if you work the land, you still have to pay for it. Sometimes in money, sometimes in grain, sometimes in chickens. Always in pain, boom work, special labor for your lord during harvest or ploughing season. Unpaid, of course, and usually during the hottest week of the year. Tallage, a special tax your lord randomly demands when he needs cash, often accompanied by the phrase, "It's the king's will." It usually isn't. Milling fee. You can't grind your own grain. That would be too simple. You must use the Lord's mill and give him a cut. If you try to use a hand mill in secret, that's illegal. Yes, seriously. Baking fee. Same thing with ovens. Use the Lord's, pay for it. Or hide your bread and hope no one smells it. Harriet, when you die, your family owes the Lord your best animal, a kind of death fee. Because nothing says rest in peace like taking your widow's last ox. What about royal taxes? Oh yes, the king wants money too. Sometimes it's for a war. Sometimes it's for a new castle. Sometimes it's just because. Royal taxes include poll tax, a flat fee per person. The more people in your household, the more you owe. Land tax, based on how much land you farm. Customary dues, vague, mysterious, and impossible to argue with. These taxes are collected by officials known as reeves, bailiffs, or sheriffs, who are not known for their compassion or subtlety. If you can't pay, they'll take your tools, your animals, or your dignity, whichever's easiest to carry. How much is too much? Let's do some extremely rough medieval math. Imagine you harvest 10 sacks of grain. To go to your lord, one goes to the church, one goes to rent, one is needed to replant next year, one is taken in milling and baking fees. That leaves 4 sacks to feed your family, trade, and survive winter, and that's assuming a good harvest. In a bad year, you might owe more than you grow, which means borrowing grain, or selling your extra goat, or skipping meals, again. But wait. You don't even use money. Here's the weird part. Most of this isn't paid in coins. Peasants lived in a mostly cashless economy. You paid in goods or labor. Your taxes might be a bushel of rye, 2 days of plowing, 3 chickens, and a promise not to run away. Money was rare. Coins were for merchants, knights, and the guy who sells spices. You, dear peasant, were lucky to see a single silver penny a year, and even then, you'd probably lose it in the mud. Resistance, very quiet resistance. Did peasants ever resist? Yes, but gently. Sometimes they underreported harvests, hid a few sacks of grain in the woods, used illegal hand mills at night, bribed reeves with cheese, or rallied once in a while. They revolted. The most famous, the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, when angry workers stormed London shouting no more taxes, and briefly made the king very nervous. It didn't last, but it proved that even muddy, tired people can only take so much. The village economy, a sad little circle. This taxing created a strange, self-defeating loop. You worked hard to grow food, you gave most of it away, you barely survived, and then you did it all over again. Sometimes it felt like the whole system was designed to keep you just alive enough to keep working, but never quite free. Still, the community endured. People helped each other, shared bread, gossiped about the miller, sang at the harvest festival. Somehow, they made space for life between the fees. And now, sleep, debt-free sort of. So here we are. You've paid your dues. The tithe is dropped off. The Lord's harvest is in. The last fee has been grudgingly handed over, and for a few brief months before winter, you're free from payments. You sit by the fire, your boots are dry, your belly is not empty. Outside, the bailiff is not knocking. Inside, your child hums a song with no words. Village life, gossip, ale, and the annual pig chase. Let's take a break from plague and taxes for a minute. You're still a peasant? Yes. Still living in a crooked little hut that leaks when it rains. But not every moment of medieval life was suffering and mud. Sometimes, just sometimes, life was almost fun. So let's settle into the hum of your village, the smells, the sounds, the deeply suspicious stew someone's cooking 3 doors down. This chapter is about the quieter, weirder joys of peasant life, the gossip, the ale, the shared stories, and yes, the annual pig chase. Let's begin. Welcome to the village. Your village isn't big, maybe 100 people, tops. There's a cluster of cottages along the muddy path, a church that smells like candle, wax and damp stone, and a tavern where the beer's warm, but the company's warmer. This place is your world. You were probably born here, will probably die here, and you know every pig, person, and pothole by heart. You even name the potholes. That big one by the well, that's old Walter. Gossip. The medieval news network. No parchment, no printing press, No Twitter. So how did people learn things? Gossip. You hear everything from your neighbors. Who's brewing ale to week? Who's sneaking out to the woods at night? Who saw the reeve flirting with the widow behind the BAKEHOUSC. Whispered at the well, murmured in church pews, and shouted across fields when someone's cow goes missing. Is all of it true? Absolutely not. Is it more entertaining than the priest's sermons? Oh yes. Ale. The universal language peasants didn't drink much water. Not because they were health experts, but because water could make you extremely dead. So instead, they drank ale all day, even kids. But don't worry. Peasant ale wasn't strong just enough alcohol to kill the bacteria and dull the edge of a bad day. You might even drink it for breakfast, not to party, just to survive. Many households brewed their own. Some women became known as alewives, respected and slightly feared for their brewing skills. If your ale was good, the neighbors came back. If it was bad, well, people talked. Again, gossip. The village tavern. Every decent village had a little tavern, more like a dark, smoky room with uneven stalls and one candle, but it worked. You'd go there after a long day to drink, swap stories, and hear the same 3 songs played on a badly tuned fiddle. There's probably a dog sleeping under the table. No one knows whose it is. No one minds. And when the harvest was done, and the last taxes scraped together, the tavern was the place to let loose. There might be dancing, or singing, or just a very intense argument about who saw the biggest rat last week. Market day excitement. Most villages held a market day once a week or month. People from surrounding areas came to trade goods, show off new pigs, or haggle over onions like their lives depended on it. You'd bring whatever you had: wool, eggs, handmade shoes, baskets, maybe a slightly lumpy turnip, and try to trade it for something better. It was loud, messy, and the closest thing to a holiday most peasants got. Plus, you might catch a traveling juggler or a man yelling about miracle potions made from beetroot and mystery dust. Always worth the risk. The festival calendar. Despite the work, peasants had a surprising number of feast days thanks to the church calendar. There were suns to celebrate, harvests to bless, and random holy days that offered a reason to eat slightly better food and pretend not to be tired. Some favorites included May Day, dancing around poles and pretending your back doesn't hurt, midsummer, bonfires, songs, and hoping nobody falls into one harvest home when all the crops were finally in and you could breathe again. You'd wear your cleanest tunic, probably still muddy, eat something fried in animal fat, and maybe catch a glimpse of someone cute near the haystack. Games and the annual pig chasser. Peasants played games when they could. Football, no rules, no teams, just chaos. Dice games, wrestling, or tossing things for a distance. All simple, all chaotic. But once a year, the village held its crown jewel of entertainment, the annual pig chase. Here's how it worked. A pig, usually young, extremely fast, and very annoyed, was let loose. Dozens of villagers chased it through mud, thatch, and chaos. The first person to catch it kept the pig. Simple, hilarious, occasionally dangerous. The pig almost always won, but spirits were high, and bruises healed by winter. Community support and mild spite. In truth, village life was built on community. You needed each other. If your roof collapsed, neighbors helped rebuild. If you ran out of grain, someone might share. Births, weddings, and funerals were attended by all. Even if they didn't like you, they showed up. That's just how it worked. Of course, medieval kindness came with a little spite on the side. People remembered slights, long-standing feuds over missing chickens lasted generations. You might share bread with your neighbor on Monday and accuse her of stealing your firewood on Tuesday, but deep down, you still relied on each other. Even if her ale was terrible, what you heard around the fire each night, after the animals were quiet and the day's labor was done, villagers gathered around the hearth. They told stories, some were ancient, folk tales talking wolves, glowing spirits in the forest, or knights who turned into trees. Others were just retellings of what happened to villages over, but with more drama and dragons added in. No books, no candles for reading, just voices, shadows, and imagination. And for a moment, as you sat there with sore feet and a full belly, life didn't feel quite so heavy. You versus the forest, gathering, hunting, and poaching. You wake up hungry. Again, there's no bread left. The cabbage is gone. Your neighbor isn't sharing. The Lord raised rents last week, and your youngest child just tried to eat a candle. So, you do what peasants have done for centuries when the fields fail and the pantry's empty. You go to the forest, but don't get too excited. This isn't a free-for-all. In fact, the forest is dangerous not just because of wolves and wild boars, but because of who owns the woods. And spoiler, it's not you. A forbiddance for steers the thing, technically, that nice patch of trees, filled with mushrooms and deer. It belongs to the Lord, or maybe the king, or someone very rich and very far away who will never set foot there, but still expects you to keep out. It's called a royal forest, or sometimes the king's game preserve. But don't be fooled by the name. It has nothing to do with nature conservation. It's all about keeping the best hunting grounds for the wealthy. So even though you need food, the forest is off-limits. Well, sort of, gathering, the legal way, to almost eat deer were a few things peasants were technically allowed to do in the woods. These were called common rights. You could gather fallen branches for firewood, pick nuts, berries, and mushrooms, cut bracken for animal bedding, graze your pigs on fallen acorns called pannage. But even then, there were rules, lots of rules, written by people who didn't have to follow them. Break a branch off a living tree. That's theft. Dig up roots. That's trespassing. Take too many mushrooms. That's greedy. And probably a superstition violation to. So you walk carefully, listen for gamekeepers, and keep one eye on the path, and the other on that tempting patch of blackberries. The forest feeds. Carefuller still. For many peasants, the forest was a quiet lifesaver. In hard times, a few mushrooms or hazelnuts could make the difference between hunger and something like a meal. And you get good at it. You learn which plants won't kill you, which bark can make tea, which moss is best for bandages, and which berries are just lying to you with their bright colors and friendly smell. You become part forager, part squirrel. It's not a feast, but it's food, firewood. The great medieval debate. You need firewood for cooking and staying alive in winter. But good luck getting it. Fallen twigs and branches are fair game, unless someone else gets there first. But cutting a tree, that's forbiddance. Even gathering too much firewood could get you fined. There are stories of people being dragged to court for carrying suspiciously thick sticks home. You can imagine the trial. Judge: did you break this off a living tree? You: no, sir, the tree dropped it. Honest tree says nothing, because it's a tree still. Many peasants bent the rules, quietly, at night, with a very dull axe, poaching, the most dangerous dinner. Let's say you're really hungry. You see a rabbit. It's plump. It looks at you. You look back. You have a slingshot. And, just like that, you're a poacher. That's illegal. All game animals, deer, rabbits, wild boar, game birds belong to the nobility. Killing one without permission wasn't just frowned upon, it could get you imprisoned, or worse. Some penalties for poaching included heavy fines, which you can't pay, public shaming, which everyone attends, mutilation, losing a hand or ear, death. If they're really feeling dramatic still, people did it a lot, because nothing tastes better than forbidden's roast rabbit. After 3 weeks of cabbage water, how to poach without dying, peasants got creative. They set snares, small traps hidden along animal paths. They used nets and pitfalls covered with leaves. Some made homemade bows, quietly practicing in the woods. Others partnered with local outlaws, rogues and ex-soldiers who lived in the forest and didn't care about laws or lords. They'd kill the deer, you'd help carry it. Then both of you split the meat and hope no one saw you. The key was being fast, quiet, and never telling anyone where the meat came from. If someone asked, you just said, "Oh, this. My cousin's pig, very deer-shaped pig. Don't worry about it." The gamekeepers don't make things trickier. The lords employed gamekeepers, men paid to patrol the forests, catch poachers, and generally make life worse. They knew the woods well. They carried weapons, and they had the legal right to search, question, and arrest if you were caught with fresh meat, or suspiciously full baskets of mushrooms, or even walking too confidently through the trees. They'd get involved. Sometimes they'd turn a blind eye for a bribe, or because they remembered when they were hungry to. Other times they didn't. Folklore, fairies, and the forest after dark. Forest wasn't just about food. It was a place of stories. People believed spirits lived in the trees. Fairies, witches, green men, wolves that walked like people, ghosts of hunters lost to the mist. Children were told never to wander off the path, never to whistle after dark, never to thank the woods aloud. It might think you owe it something. Some peasants left offerings, a bit of bread, a flower, a whispered prayer to whatever might be listening. Whether it worked or not, who knows, but you slept better after doing it. The forest as escape for some. The woods were more than food, they were freedom. If a peasant fled their lord and hid in the forest for a year and a day without being caught, they could sometimes claim freedom by custom. That was rare, but it gave the forest an air of quiet rebellion, a place where the rules thinned, where law was softer, shadows were thicker, and life, while hard, was yours. Women's work, spinning, birthing, and everything else. You wake up before sunrise. Not because you want to, because the baby's crying. The fire went out. The bread isn't rising. And your husband somehow slept through all of it. Welcome to the average day of a medieval peasant woman. Sure, the men worked the fields and swung the hammers, but women did everything else. And they did it while pregnant, tired, and usually holding a child on one hip and a chicken under the other arm. Let's take a slow, sleepy walk through the world of medieval peasant women. Bring your spindle. The first job. Keeping everyone alive. Women weren't just homemakers. That's way too soft a word. They cooked, cleaned, mended, gardened, fed animals, tended fires, raised children, cared for the sick, preserved food, made clothes, and somehow kept the family from collapsing into total chaos. Think of them as the medieval version of Google search, Amazon Prime, and a 24-hour emergency clinic, all in one person, with no shoes. And when something broke, or someone bled, or dinner caught fire, guess who fixed it? Yadher. Laundry without a washing machine every so often. Clothes had to be washed. And it was a huge job. First, you carried the clothes to the river or communal washing spot. Then, you beat them against rocks or scrubbed them with ashes and water. Then, you dried them on bushes or ropes. Then, you hoped it wouldn't rain halfway through. and medieval soap. It was, let's say, rustic, usually a mix of animal, fat and lye, effective, but not gentle. Especially on hands already raw from other chores. So yes, laundry day was real. And no, nobody liked it. Spinning and sewing. The never-ending thread spinning wasn't a hobby. It was survival. Women turned raw wool or flax into thread, using drop spindles, little wooden tools that twirled in your hands like magic, but also gave you blisters. Then, they used that thread to make or mend clothes for the whole family. No Target, no online orders. If your shirt tore, you fixed it. If your child outgrew their tunic, you cut it down and reused the fabric. And all this happened in spare moments, while watching children, minding the stew, or resting after carrying firewood. Multitasking, more like multi-surviving. The village garden bosswoman also tended the kitchen gardens. These weren't just for flavor. They were often the only source of vegetables and herbs, cabbage, onions, leeks, peas, and garlic, plus herbs like sage, parsley, and dill, and maybe a medicinal plant or two, like comfrey or yarrow. If something hurt or looked infected, you didn't call a doctor. You called the village woman who knew her plants. And if your stew tasted bland, that same woman probably had something to fix it. Chickens, cows, and goat draymen handled the plows. Women handled everything smaller, but still alive. Chickens had to be fed. Cows had to be milked. Goats had to be kept from eating literally everything. And animals had personalities. The mean goose, the lazy hen, the escape artist goat named Sprout. It was like running a farm daycare, with more feathers and less patience. And of course, if one of them got sick, it was the woman who stayed up nursing it with warm cloths and worrying, giving birth and hoping you lived through it. Childbirth in the Middle Ages was terrifying. No hospitals, no painkillers, no trained doctors unless you were rich. Just a group of women, a low bed, some herbs, and a lot of praying. Midwives were local experts. Sometimes older women with dozens of deliveries under their belts. They came with knowledge, passed down through generations, and a strong stomach. Because childbirth wasn't just hard, it was risky. For every happy baby cry, there were moments of silence no one talked about. But women supported each other. They held hands, told stories, shared pain. And when a new life entered the world, they wrapped it in linen, kissed its soft head, and got back to cooking dinner. Widowhood and single motherhood. Still working if your husband died, which happened a lot. You didn't stop. You couldn't. Many widows kept running the farm, tilled their own soil, paid their own taxes, raised their children alone. Some remarried, some didn't. Some became respected village elders, known for their wisdom, stubbornness, and ability to make stew out of almost nothing. Others became alewives, women who brewed unsold beer. It was one of the few ways a peasant woman could earn money outside the home. If medieval peasants had LinkedIn, it would just say widow, brewer, legend, social life in the gaps between chores. Despite the work, women weren't always alone. The village was full of life. They met at the well, exchanged gossip while spinning, sang songs together while harvesting, shared childcare when someone got sick, celebrated births, grieved deaths, passed down stories. It was community, built not in big speeches, but in shared tasks and quiet moments. You helped your neighbor mend a fence. She helped you deliver your third child. That's how it worked. Folk wisdom and healing hands. The very village had at least one woman who knew more than the rest. She could identify plants, treat wounds, calm fevers, and talk to spirits if needed. Sometimes she was called a healer. sometimes a wise woman, sometimes a witch, especially if things went wrong. She used honey for cuts, onion poultices for coughs, spoke charms over crying babies, and taught younger women how to care, how to soothe, how to stay calm. Her knowledge wasn't written down. It lived in her hands and her voice. War marches past your door. You're in your field, minding your turnips, when you hear it. The steady thump of hooves, the clang of armor, voices shouting commands you can't quite understand. War is coming, and it's not asking for permission. For peasants, war was rarely about glory or banners or heroic duels. It was more like someone else's very loud, very expensive argument destroying your cabbage patch. So tonight, tuck yourself into the straw, and we'll quietly explore what happened when war came crashing into your little muddy corner of the medieval world. Knights look cool until they trample your barley. Let's say a group of knights rides through your village, shiny armor, bright flags, lots of dramatic yelling. They look impressive. And then they ride straight through your newly planted field, crush your fence, drink from your well, and take your last good chicken for the king. Suddenly, they're less impressive. War didn't care if you were a peasant. In fact, you were the most convenient target, easy to rob, easier to blame, and much too tired to fight back. Sometimes your own lord brought war. Sometimes it was his enemies. Sometimes nobody even explained what the war was about. You just knew it meant trouble. Supply chain. That's you. You are the supply chain. Soldiers on the move needed food, drink, shelter, and horses. Guess who provided all that? Yep. You. Armies often foraged, which is a polite way of saying they helped themselves to whatever they wanted. Grain, pigs, firewood, ale, cheese. Gone. And if they stayed overnight, you had to host them. Imagine 30 sweaty men with swords sleeping in your barn. They snore, they smell. One of them breaks your butter churn. And in the morning, they're gone, and so is half your winter food. You weren't thanked, you weren't paid. You were just grateful they didn't set your house on fire. Sometimes they did set your house on fire if your village was caught between two sides, especially if it was in a border zone. It might get burned on purpose. This was called scorched earth tactics. One army would destroy fields, homes, mills, and barns, so the other side couldn't use them. It didn't matter that the people living there weren't soldiers. Your only option: run. Whole families would flee into forests, hiding in huts or caves, or sleeping under trees, waiting for the fighting to pass. If you were lucky, you'd return to a damaged home. If you weren't, well, sometimes there was nothing left but ashes. Rebellion. Care for what you wish for. Sometimes peasants got tired of being stepped on literally and economically and rebelled. There were uprisings across Europe. The Peasants' Revolt in England, 1381. The Jacquerie in France, 1358. The Bundschuh movement in Germany, late 1400s. These revolts usually started with hope and ended with horror. Peasants demanded fairer taxes, better wages, and the right to not be treated like furniture. But lords didn't like that. Rebellions were crushed hard. Leaders were hanged, burned, or beheaded. Villages were punished. Taxes got worse, and the survivors quietly went back to their plows. So yes, rebellion happened. But it was a dangerous gamble. Most peasants gambled with dice, not swords, drafted. Maybe, but probably poorly equipped. You might be called to fight, especially if you were a free peasant, not a serf. But don't expect armor, or training, or a decent sword. You'd get a spear, maybe a helmet made out of a cooking pot, and instructions like stand in that direction and try not to die. You weren't there to win. You were there to slow down the enemy. It wasn't glorious. It was confusing, muddy, loud, and terrifying. And if you survived, you went home, picked up your hoe, and got back to digging, with new scars and fewer neighbors. Women and children during war, staying invisible when war arrived. The goal for women and children was simple: stay out of sight. Stay alive. Women often packed essentials: bread, dried meat, maybe some coins, and led children into nearby woods or hills. If the soldiers were from your own side, maybe they ignored you. If they weren't, things could get much worse. War wasn't kind, and it didn't follow rules. Women were often victims of violence, theft, or worse. There were no police, no protection, and no consequences for soldiers. Survival meant silence, speed, and hoping the chickens didn't make too much noise. War aftermath: picking up the piece after the soldiers left. You walked back into your village, and you started counting. How many roofs are missing? How many sheep are gone? Who didn't make it back from the forest? Rebuilding was slow. You replanted. You patched holes with what little wood was left. You bartered for tools. You borrowed food from neighbors. You prayed for good weather. It might take years to recover. Sometimes you never fully did. And just when things started to feel normal again, another war might come through, because kings rarely got tired of fighting. But peasants were always tired. War stories and worn out memories. Even if you never picked up a weapon, war became part of your life story. Maybe you remembered hiding under a blanket while nights thundered past, or the year you had to share a turnip with your brother, or the soldier who took your father's shoes and left a single copper coin. Those stories were passed down, told in quiet voices over the fire, not with pride, but with weary acceptance. Don't trust the men with flags. Someone might say they don't care about your wheat. Slowly, very slowly, life changes. For most of your peasant life, things have stayed the same. Same crops, same hut, same aching back, same taxes, same mud. But then, little shifts start to happen. Not loud revolutions or dramatic inventions. No one's riding into town shouting it's the Renaissance. No, it's slower than that. Like grass growing, like bread rising, like a stiff old ox finally deciding to move. And suddenly, without really noticing, when it happened, you realize that life isn't exactly like your grandfather's anymore. The plague that took half and changed everything. Let's rewind to the Black Death for a moment. Yes, again. It keeps coming back, kind of like fleas. When the plague tore through Europe in the mid-1300s, it killed a lot of people. Some say 1/3, others say half. In some villages, no one was left to even bury the dead. It was horrible, but strangely, it also shook up the system. You see, when half the peasants were gone, suddenly there weren't enough people left to do all the farming, weaving, baking, fencing, pig chasing, etc. Which meant one important thing: your labor was now valuable. Fewer peasants equals better deals. Bore the plague. You worked your lord's land for free, paid a pile of taxes, and were basically told to be grateful for the opportunity. After the plague, you could ask for wages. You could leave for a better offer in another village. You could even, in some places, buy your freedom from serfdom. Some lords panicked. They passed laws to stop peasants from moving or demanding better pay. But those laws didn't always work. The system had been cracked. And through that little crack, a bit of sunlight started to peek through. Peasants on the move for centuries. Peasants were stuck. You were born in one village. You lived there. You died there. Maybe if you were lucky, you went to the next village over for a fair or a cousin's wedding. But now, you started hearing things. Over in Kent, they're paying coin for a harvest help. In Norfolk, there's empty land, they'll let you farm yourself. In town, they need wool spinners and they'll pay. Some peasants started walking. Not everyone, of course, most stayed put. But for the first time, the idea of mobility started to stir. You didn't have to stay where your great-grandfather lived. You could go to towns. The new escape hatch towns grew. Slowly, but steadily, and towns were different. They had walls, markets, craftsmen, alehouses, bells that rang at the hour instead of roosters screaming randomly. If you made it to a town and lived there long enough, you could even gain freedom from your feudal lord. There was even a saying, "Town air makes you free." That didn't mean life in town was easy. You'd probably live in a cramped room above a noisy workshop, and you still had to deal with things like plague, taxes, and not being able to read, but you were not a serf. That alone felt like progress. Lords start getting nervous with fewer peasants stuck on their land. Some lords started to feel insecure. They needed people to work the fields, but those people now had choices. So lords tried different things, offering wages instead of just food and land, giving better living conditions, sometimes even selling small plots of land to peasants. It wasn't generosity, it was survival. The power dynamic had shifted just enough that lords had to start acting a little more like landlords, and a little less like mini-kings. Was it a peasant paradise? No, but compared to the crushing centuries before, it was progress, the rise of the yeoman. A new type of person started to appear in villages. The yeomen weren't nobles. They weren't serfs either. They were free peasants, small landowners who worked their own farms, often with help from family. They could vote in some local councils. They could hire workers. They might even own a house. They weren't rich, but they weren't stuck. If the medieval peasant had a dream, the yeoman was it. Enough land to grow your own food, some left to sell, and no lord breathing down your neck every time your pig wandered into the wrong field. Technology slowly crawls in. We're not talking smartphones or even forks, but little improvements began to show up. Heavy plows made it easier to farm dense soil. Horse collars made horses more useful than oxen. Water mills and windmills helped grind grain, saw wood, even pump water. These tiny changes made daily work just a bit easier, not painless, but slightly less backbreaking. And when your whole life is labor, a little help means a lot. Education. Sort of. Most peasants still couldn't read. But with growing towns and churches, more children started learning basic skills, letters, numbers, maybe even Latin if you were fancy. Village priests sometimes taught boys to read religious texts. Girls, not so much, unless you had a very unusual family. Still, the idea of education wasn't just for nobles anymore. A little learning was creeping down the social ladder. Not enough to change everything, but enough to plant a seed. The world keeps turning. By the 1400s and 1500s, peasant life had changed just enough that your great-great-grandkids might not recognize it. Sure, they still worked the land, still paid taxes, still cursed the weather, but they weren't stuck like you were. They had choices, rights. Some could read, some owned land, and even if they still got wet, muddy, and flea-bitten, they were just a bit freer than before. Not because of one big revolution, but because of 100 tiny shifts, barely noticed at the time. The peasant's quiet legacy. So here you are. You've lived through 15 chapters of mud, misery, plagues, pigs, porridge, and way too many taxes. You've farmed in the rain, prayed during famines, buried friends after outbreaks, and handed over half your barley to some guy in chainmail who's never touched a shovel. And yet you survived, maybe not in a heroic, banner-waving kind of way, but in the way most people in history survive, quietly, stubbornly, and with a little bit of grumbling. Now let's talk about what's left behind. Because even though peasants rarely made headlines, they helped shape the world in ways that still ripple out today. Dirt, sweat, and civilization eventually starts with food. And you, humble peasant, were the one growing it. You fed the manor, the town, the monastery, the army, and the wandering bard who sang about the night, but not about you. Typical. Without peasants, there is no kingdom, no castles, no universities, no cathedrals. No matter how fancy the lords got, or how holy the priests pretended to be, they still needed turnips, and those didn't plant themselves. Behind every grand historical event, there was someone digging in the background, wondering if the potatoes would make it this year. The strength of small lives' peasant life didn't look important from a distance. It was repetitive, local, muddy, but there's power in that kind of life. Raising a family, holding on to a small patch of land, passing on traditions, recipes, lullabies, and old stories by candlelight. It's not flashy, but it's strong. Peasants kept villages alive after plagues, after invasions, after fires and famines. When kings fell and castles crumbled, the field was still there. Someone still had to till it. In that way, peasants were the true foundation of medieval life. Not loud, but lasting. Your name wasn't written down. You probably didn't make it into the history books. Maybe, if you were lucky, a church scribe scribbled your name in a baptism register wrongly spelled, of course, but most peasants lived and died nameless in official records. That doesn't mean you were invisible. Your thatched cottage left marks in the soil. Your cooking fire left soot on the rafters. Your children left descendants who left descendants who may or may not be listening to this right now while trying to fall asleep. You were real, you mattered. Even if history forgot to say your name out loud, you endured everything. Let's recap what you lived through. Disease with no medicine, war with no warning, taxes with no mercy, work with no rest, winters with no insulation, rules with no fairness, religion with a side of guilt, and bread that could break your teeth, and still you built lives. You laughed at feasts, loved your family, sang to your animals, and watched sunsets over golden fields like anyone else. Your strength was in your survival. You didn't change the world in a single day, but you outlasted everything it threw at you. The world you helped make over the centuries, the seeds you planted literally and metaphorically grew. You taught your children to farm, to stitch, to pray, to endure. When towns grew, your children moved there. When literacy spread, they learned to read. When rights were fought for, they slowly, painfully earned some. Modern society didn't appear out of nowhere. It was built, slowly, on the backs of people like you. Your simple life was the compost from which progress eventually sprouted. So if modern folks ever complain about slow Wi-Fi, may they remember you hauling buckets from a frozen stream, while covered in blisters and cow smell. A legacy written in earth. You didn't leave behind palaces or poetry, but you left furrows in fields, foundations beneath modern homes, stone. Well, still use centuries later, family names that live on, recipes passed down through generations, and quiet, everyday strength that's harder to measure, but impossible to forget. Heaven in forgotten villages. Your footprints remain, sometimes literally, preserved in hardened mud. And that's not nothing. That's a legacy made from calluses, patience, and the refusal to give up. A soft goodbye. So now we come to the end. The candle flickers low in your tiny cottage. The chickens have roosted. The fields sleep under moonlight. The world feels quiet just for a moment. You stretch out on your scratchy straw mattress, the smell of hearth smoke in the air, and close your eyes. Tomorrow, you'll wake up before dawn again. The cows will still need milking, the frost will still bite your toes, the Lord will still expect his share, but tonight, there's peace. You made it through another day. You made it through another year. You made it through history. And even though no statue was ever carved in your name, your life shaped the world, one muddy footstep at a time. Sleep well, dear peasant, you've earned it.